Joining us now to talk about all this is a man who served for 5 years as an attorney in the voting section of the Department of Justice. He's also the author of a book came out a couple of years ago called Injustice, Exposing the Racial Agenda of the Obama Justice Department. And we welcome in J. Christian Adams. Hey, Jay, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. And you wrote about this in the Washington Times the other day, and a great piece. And right off the bat, you explain how the president misled when he talked about this woman in Florida who had to wait 6 hours online to vote. That was only half the story.
Yeah, and unfortunately, not a regular common story. What happened was Desaline Victor voted on the first day of early voting, which is the most notorious day for long lines because you only have a few voting sites open in Florida. It's not every polling place. And it's worse than the second day, and the second day is worse than the third day, and the fourth, and so on. And so she picked the absolute worst day. Had she gone to vote in her precinct on Election Day, it probably would have been about 10 minutes, because the average wait online, according to MIT this year, in the last election was 13 minutes. That's it. So we had this national crisis over a 13-minute wait.
That is amazing, of course. But of course, it's not unlike Obama and the administration to take a story and try to exploit it for all it's worth. But this Justice Department and this president, they've gone beyond just using stories out of context to promote an agenda. You point out in your piece that they violated federal law on several occasions.
Well, that's right. I mean, look, you have the President of the United States in his State of the Union address calling for a federal solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. But at the same time, you have his own Defense Department, the Pentagon, violating federal law by not helping military voters. For example, the law requires a voting assistance office where soldiers and sailors and airmen can go get help casting their ballot back home. You have a law that requires every installation to have these offices to help soldiers vote. Well, this Defense Department has less than half compliance. Less than half of the military installations around the world and in the United States have these offices. They're just ignoring the law. So, we can talk about the long lines for one lady in Florida who voted on the first day of early voting, but when it comes to military voters, apparently that's not a priority of this president.
Right, and well, absolutely. And, it goes back to the first sign of the direction that this president and this Justice Department would be headed in was the Black Panther case.
Well, of course, I brought that case, so I can talk a lot about that one. Yeah, look, that was a case of voter intimidation where people were standing in front of the polls with billy clubs and uniforms shouting racial slurs at people. If that doesn't violate federal law, I don't know what does. And this department under Eric Holder apparently doesn't see that as a problem.
Yeah, no, it's really unfathomable to imagine that if things were reversed, that if skinheads or white supremacists or whomever, I won't say the Ku Klux Klan because the Black Panthers new Black Panther Party aren't going around killing anybody, but the fact of the matter is, any white supremacist group or who spews the kind of rhetoric that the new Black Panther Party spews regarding race were to show up with a billy club, they'd be hauled away, arrested, and put in jail for as long as possible.
Of course they would, and they should. And if the Black Panthers do it, so should they. But under Eric Holder, he has allowed in the Justice Department people who believe in enforcing the law equally, that it doesn't matter who the defendants are. The people who believe in enforcing the law equally were targeted by Obama political minions inside the DOJ for removal because they wanted to enforce the law equally, and Holder didn't do anything about it. He knew about it. He had a meeting with the people, and he just doesn't care. He makes it very clear what his priorities are.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're talking to J. Christian Adams, former Justice Department official, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Also, the book, like I said, from Regnery is a couple years old, but it's very much worth the read, Injustice, which exposes the Obama Justice Department. And let's get back to voting and find out where you think we are headed. When I hear about, no voter ID, when I hear about registering or voting on the internet. There's absolutely no way to prove if you're voting on the internet, who's actually voting on the internet. I mean, it could be someone in your home or with your account or whatever. I mean, and this commission that Obama has proposed, if this commission does come to fruition, then as you put in your piece, depending on who he puts on the commission, I mean, what could we see out of that?
Well, your listeners, excuse me, need to understand something. The left and the Democrats know how to play the game involving election process rules. When I mean election process, I mean how you vote, when you vote, how you register, all those sort of rules of the game. Whereas Republicans don't have a clue. They just don't understand that the ground is moving underneath them. And this commission is the latest example. They're going to look at long lines. Well, what they come up with, I guarantee, will be things that involve Washington, D.C. solutions instead of the local solutions that are required. The left wants to federalize elections. They want as much power in Washington, D.C. And the Constitution, on the other hand, says that the states are supposed to run elections.
You took the words right out of my mouth, not to interrupt, but I was going to say there is no place in the Constitution for federalizing elections.
Well, what they will use is what's called the Elections Clause, that Congress can set the time, place, and manner of elections for Congress. But that doesn't include the states. And some states like New Jersey, Virginia, and Mississippi have staggered their elections off of the federal cycle, so there is less jurisdiction from Washington over state elections. But because congressional elections take place when most people have state elections, it gives Washington the camel's nose under the tent. But the left and the Democrats always want more power in Washington, and elections are no different.
No, you're absolutely right, and you're so right about the Republicans. Not only do they not have a clue about this issue, they don't have a clue about many issues, and if they do, they certainly don't know how to come out and express it to the public because the media is never going to be on their side. It's incumbent upon them to do it, and they're just so bad at communicating. From the presidential candidate on the Republican side on down, no matter what the issue, they just can't get the message out and inform the people out there of what's really going on.
Well, it's even worse than that. You're exactly right, but some Republicans think the best way to win elections is to sound like Democrats.
No kidding. No kidding. Yep.
And when it comes to things like voter ID and other election-related issues, you have some Republicans who think the more they sound like Democrats, the more votes they will get. And it's exactly the opposite, because these election process issues are an existential game for Democrats. It's a live or die strategy. They know that if they can change the rules of the game, they'll get a 10 percentage point advantage in any election there is.
No, you're absolutely right. And what the main goal of immigration reform is to get those people to vote. Now, if the Republicans came back and said, okay, we'll make you quasi citizens in 2 years, but you're not going to vote for 15 years, then all of a sudden the Democrats' stated goal of keeping families together and not penalizing children and sending them back and when they came here without their knowledge, that'll all go out the window. They'll never accept that because their main goal is to get all those, or as many as possible, of the new citizens get their votes.
Well, yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, you have identified another area, which is immigration, where Republicans incorrectly think that they will suddenly get Hispanic support if they support immigration reform. But when you start cranking in 14 million new voters, which some people want to do on the left, Republicans will never win another presidential election.
Right.
But they're fools. They don't understand the racial polarization that exists and cannot be cracked in many communities around the country. The left has worked decades to stoke up this polarization, to result in things like 95% of African Americans voting for Obama, 72% of Hispanics. That just doesn't happen overnight, and it can't be undone overnight.
No, and of course, Jay, the fact of the matter is that from the Pew Research Center, the people who voted Hispanics overwhelmingly for Obama, immigration was like fifth on their list of concerns. So changing that won't do it. But here's another one. As soon as immigration reform is passed, whatever the Republicans won't allow to go in it, whatever it is, 2 months later down the road or right before the next midterm election or the next presidential election, these wonderful Republicans who want to be just like Democrats, as you correctly alluded to, will be portrayed by the Democrats as the evil ones who they wouldn't let this in when we did immigration reform. We wanted that in there, but they wouldn't let it in. And once again, they'll be on the outside looking in, even though they acquiesced to 90% of what the Democrats wanted. So you're right. It's just a no-win.
You can look at history. George Bush signed a renewal of the Voting Rights Act in 2006 that gave the NAACP everything they wanted. The NAACP was completely quiet and friendly and allegedly on the side of President Bush through this legislative process. The minute that the ink dried on Bush signing the legislation, they began to attack Bush and his failures in civil rights.
There you go.
And they were never let up through the moment that Barack Obama's hand lifted off the Bible in 2009. It was a relentless assault on Bush. That's how they operate. They don't gain anything by signing up in league with the left.
No, you're absolutely right. Hey, listen, I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. It was fascinating.
Anytime.
Thank you. J. Christian Adams, ladies and gentlemen, former voting section member of the Justice Department and author of Injustice. We didn't have him on for the book, but just I think it's a great book, and everybody should check it out.